Alrighty, so welcome to part 6 of the Jump to Lightspeed spoiler review. Still getting a lot of really good cards, as been kind of par for the course with spoiler season. Gonna get 2 more leaders, so we're up to 16. The last 2 should be revealed later this week, so we're almost done with all the leaders. Not almost done with all the cards, although spoiler season, or at least the way it is currently being conducted, will be ending soon, and then I assume most of the rest of the cards will be revealed through media kits and other teasers like that. But let's get into the cards. Before we do, please hit that subscribe button if you haven't. Do check out my Patreon if you're interested in some more content from me. About to start crafting a bunch of new decks with the new cards, and they will be featured there in abundance. All right, so let's get into the 2 new leaders. The first one is Poe Dameron. This is an aggression heroism leader with a front side action that costs 1. Says flip this leader and attach him as an upgrade to a friendly vehicle unit without a pilot on it. So this is very unique, right? This is very different than basically any other leader. On his flipped side, he is a 5-cost deploy that is a 4/6 vanilla, no effect, and then he has the +2/+1 stats as an upgrade as a resistance pilot, and he has an action on this side that says it costs 1. Attach this upgrade to a friendly vehicle unit without a pilot on it. Use this ability only once each turn. So this guy his ability just actually flips him, attaches him to something as an upgrade. So he's just coming into play as an upgrade, and he's going to be around, and he can jump around, right? You can still use that action that costs 1, jump him from one ship to another, and get extra value, right? So you have 2 ships. You can first attack with the upgraded one, then bam, jump him over to another one, attack, right? The 1 cost +2/+1 is kind of rate. There are other pilots that give that stat line, but this is repeatable, right? This never goes away. He doesn't give any other perks. So a lot of the other pilots that have this +2/+1 or +1/+2 do have some added benefits. Now, Poe's added benefit is essentially that he doesn't cost you a card to ever do this. Nor does it cost you an epic action, right? So you can do this as much as you want. If the unit that Poe is on dies, you can, with 5 resources, just deploy him as a unit. Now you get to do that still just once, right? It's still an epic action. Once he is defeated as a unit, he can go back to jumping around as an upgrade. And this is really cool ability. This is like very mechanically unique. I like that we're getting some new kinds of leaders. The next one is also a very unique style of a leader. And I think the effect is quite powerful. Just having a repeatable pilot, you probably don't need to go as hard on actual pilot cards when you have Poe. This does look to be pretty aggressive, right? It's a cheap deployed heroism aggression leader. That is kind of all in on upgrading space units. So if you're playing aggression red with a bunch of space units, it's likely that you are playing an aggro deck to some degree. Will it be able to be faster than a Sabine deck? Probably not, but he does present some very interesting mechanical perks, and there's going to be a cool card that we'll see later that works very a ton of synergy with Poe specifically. We're going to want to use Poe's ability with other ships that benefit from upgrades. So I think it's red leader, one of the leaders. It's a green card, right? That says whenever you pilot it, you make an X-Wing token, right? So having the ability to just not need to put a bunch of pilots, which can be pretty redundant in a deck and maybe a little too all in, you just have this leader to trigger effects like that. And then you have like the new Millennium Falcon that gets buffed up if it has a pilot, right? I want to note here that this does say you can only attach it to something without a pilot on it. So even though there are ships like the Millennium Falcon or other cards like R2 that say like they don't count as a pilot, if there's already a pilot on like a Falcon, you won't be able to put Poe on it. If R2 is already on a ship, you won't be able to put Poe on it because Poe overrides that restriction. He can only jump into ships that don't have pilots. Another thing that you might want to consider here is a way to actually defeat your own Poe. First card that comes to mind is something like Heroic Sacrifice, because then you might be able to do a very powerful flip turn, right? You can get him up into space, get a big attack off with a Heroic Sacrifice, then immediately deploy him if you have 5 resources, and then get him as an actual well-statted body, right? A 4/6 for 5 is kind of solid stats. We see leaders in that stat range quite often. So this is very mechanically unique. It's going to be very interesting to build around and be cool to see what happens with Poe. The other new leader is Admiral Trench, and this is maybe even more mechanically unique than Poe. This is a cunning villainy leader. He has an action on the front side that says exhaust, discard a card that costs 3 or more from your hand. If you do, draw a card. So the point here is to fill up your discard pile, right? You're just trading a card for a card. It's a little bit of card selection at its core, right? Being able to churn. But what the first thing and basically only thing I'm looking at with this is like, how do I abuse Palpatine's return with this? You can now basically put your Vaders and your Mauls and whatever other Force units we may see in yellow-green into the discard pile and then have Palp return online. Very similar to how like Kylo could enable it. This is even cleaner because it's not costing you a card. It's cleaner than how Aphra potentially enables it because it's not random. You just can always discard your expensive card. Other than that, it is mostly just a filter effect. We'll see if there's other relevant cards that you can put into your discard pile that might benefit Admiral Trench. Maybe something like Reprocess, where you can just fill it with units and then bam, reprocess them. You kind of can go infinite, sort of, right? Never run out in that sense. Probably with restock as well, but like essentially the ability looks to me like a Palp return enabler. And then as a leader, now he's a Separatist official, and he does not have an epic action, which means he can actually deploy multiple times in a game, but his deploy costs 3 resources. So it's if you control you, and you have to have 6, right? So he deploys on 6, but he costs 3 to deploy, and he's a 4/5. And when he deploys, you reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. An opponent discards 2 of them, and then you draw 1 of the remaining cards and then discard the other. So 4 cards revealed, your opponent picks the best 2, puts them in your discard pile, and then you pick the best of the remaining cards to draw. This is incredibly grindy and incredibly like value oriented, right? The fact that he never technically goes away, that this epic action is repeatable. Once the 6 resource turn happens, you always have the ability to play a 3 cost 4/5 that draws you a card, right? With some selection built into that. So it's incredibly grindy. It's going to be very hard to kind of like go long with this kind of effect because you're getting so much value, right? You're getting kind of a 2 for 0 when you do this because you're getting a unit and a card, and it didn't actually cost you a card because it's just a leader deploy. Where is my hesitation? Well, my hesitation is simply the fact that you're not getting a free leader. All the other people you're playing get to play like a 0 cost 3/7 or a 0 cost 4/6 or whatever leader, right? There's a ton of them. The point here is that they're all getting one for free, and you not only have to wait until the 6 resource turn to get your leader, you have to spend half your resources just to deploy him. I personally think this is not going to be good enough based on like what I have learned so far about this game. It is way too fast and way too tempo oriented to allow a deck like this to thrive. I think a lot of things will need to slow down significantly before something like this can enter a meta and compete with the likes of Han and Django and Sabine and whatever else may be coming up with the new set. It's very slow. I think the fact that it costs 3 on the 6 resource turn also kind of collides pretty epically with the fact that you would want to play something like Palpatine's return on that 6 resource turn, because you can no longer do Palpatine's return and play Trench, which means the whole point of like the early Palpatine's return is to get like a giant tempo boost with your leader, but you're not getting to play the leader when you do that anymore. how often are you going to be able to squeeze that leader play in? You're going to be falling behind in games because you don't have a free leader deploy. He comes out very late. His leader ability doesn't help control the board at all. It doesn't help in any sort of tempo way. In fact, it's very tempo negative. You will be losing initiative a lot of the time just to activate his abilities, similarly to how Yoda kind of falters in that way, that just because you're getting this card selection doesn't mean it's like worth it in the sense of like giving up initiative in a game. So Admiral Trench pros, incredibly unique, incredibly interesting to kind of build around. I hope we get more discard synergy, things to do with cards in your discard pile, things that might get cheaper with things in your discard pile, right? Some way to catch up in tempo, because you are giving up a ton. You're giving up a free leader deploy. You're giving up a board affecting leader ability. And I think it's going to be too much for Trench to overcome, at least in the way the current landscape, or what I predict the landscape will be. All right, so we're going to go into some card callouts now before I jump over to SWDB to kind of do the main bulk of cards. I always do the new base. This is the last new rare base. This is Nabat Village. It's a 27 health base. It's a cunning base, and it says draw 3 more cards in your starting hand, and you can't take a mulligan. And then it says when the first action phase starts, put 3 cards from your hand on the bottom of your deck in any order. So we got a math, right? I'll give you the very quick version of this. This is less likely to find a specific card than a 6-card hand with a mulligan. So, for instance, you're a deck that wants to play ramp. You're a resupply super laser tech deck. You are more likely to find a resupply or super laser tech in your opener with a 6-card, with a regular 30 base with a mulligan than you are with Nabat Village. You are losing chance to get it. Where you gain some chance is if you're looking for exactly 2 cards, or maybe not exactly, but 2 cards. If you're looking for a 2-card combo, think I need, now there are 2 of them, and Zuckuss in my opening hand. You are more likely by about 4%, it goes something from like 23 to 27%, give or take, to find a 2-card combo, as opposed to a 30 health base, right? I don't think that's particularly significant. It's not like it's a high percentage anyway to find that 2-card combo. And you're definitely losing chance at any, like, if you're looking for one specific card, and there are a lot of decks that like mulligan pretty aggressively for a specific card, Nabat Village is actually worse in those cases. In other situations, potentially in sculpting out an opener, right, like 2 to 3 to 4, you might gain some points here. What you need to consider is you are less likely to find a turn 1 play when you play this as opposed to having a mulligan. So to compensate for that, you will likely need more turn 1 plays to make sure you actually get the benefit of being able to sculpt a curve out hand, because you can whiff on a turn 1 with 9 cards. You're actually more likely to whiff on a 2-drop with a 9-card hand than you are with a 6-card hand with a mulligan. Overall, I'm not sure the benefits here are going to be worth 3 life, but as with the other bases like this, this is going to require a lot of data tracking and like playing it, because it's not enough to think, okay, well, I'm gaining some percentages in this situation. It's whether or not those percentages are worth the 3 life. And that is very hard to quantify without like repeated exposure in games. So this one I actually think I'm like less excited about, as opposed to like the red one with the deck thinning, and like even the green one, which is giving you life at the expense of having to play more cards. The blue one I think is also really cool with the smaller starting hand, but overall they're all very interesting. Just not sure this one's going to be great. All right, let's go into the legendaries. This is Stolen AT Hauler. This is a 3-cost cunning space unit. It is a 4/5 underworld vehicle transport, and it says when defeated, choose an opponent. For this phase, they may play this unit from its owner's discard pile for free. All right. Incredibly overstated for 3 cost. The downside here, your opponent kills it, they can then play it, but then you can kill it and then you can play it back, right? So this kind of never goes away unless someone like removes its ability or someone decides not to play it. Remember, similarly to how like Cobb Vanth works, that if like you kill it when your opponent doesn't have like if your opponent claims, for instance, and then you like trade it into something, they'll never get a chance to play it because it costs an action. It's not, I don't expect that to come up too often, but in general, this card's really interesting, especially if you're able to like plan for it in your deck. I mean, there's bounce effects, right? Your opponent kills it, you can bounce it back to your own hand. If you can capture this, for instance, after your opponent steals it from you, you actually like kind of get it. Like if they ever kill the unit that's capturing it, you just get it back, right? It just returns to the owner. It doesn't return to the player that previously had it. So there's like cool interactions with this card, and the fact that it's so overstated as well is very interesting. You obviously don't really want to play it into like decks that very cleanly kill it. So like a Power of the Dark Side deck, for instance, you might not want to like mess with this card. Daring Raid plus Tarkin Town can kill this very cleanly. But again, like you can get it back. So there's a lot to like here. I think this is like maybe gonna fall a little under the radar because it's just like very generic. It doesn't really feel that legendary, although the effect is pretty legendary. And it's a very interesting card, and like Han can play this on turn 1, which is kind of crazy in like some situations. And one other thing, if you can like put a Chewbacca pilot on this card, yeah, good luck, right? That's a 7/8 that can't be defeated by bouncing or defeat effects. They have to just like pour damage into it. It's got 8 health. That could be pretty dangerous. All right, next new legendary is Invincible. This is a 6-cost cunning villainy space unit. It's a 6/6 separatist vehicle capital ship. It says if you control a unique separatist card, this unit costs 1 less to play, and that includes leaders in the deploy zone, in the undeployed zone, right? So like specifically, this is a call out to Trench, right? This just costs 5 in an Admiral Trench deck, but it also costs 5 in like a Dooku deck or Wat Tambor, which is actually maybe the most interesting one. It has another effect that says when you deploy a leader, you may return a non-leader unit that costs 3 or less to its owner's hand. So it's like it plays small waylay when you deploy your leader. And of course, Trench, you can deploy him multiple times. And I think that's kind of like the call out here, although I don't actually think this card's particularly good with Trench. I think I would look, the first place I'm looking is like, okay, I'm looking for a 5-cost deploy leader to play with this so I can play Invincible and then deploy my leader and bounce them. That kind of gives this a when played effect, just a very slow when played effect. But you know me, I don't like chunky units that don't do anything when you play them, so that's the way I would work around that. So Wat Tambor is the 5 deployed leader. That's a separatist that you can do something with this. I'm not sure Wat Tambor is really on the lookout for like a chunky 5-cost space unit, because it's like kind of counter to the swarming style ability that he is trying to emphasize. But this card's interesting. You can play it for 3 in a Dooku deck, right? Because Dooku automatically reduces this by 1 cost, and then he can exploit this because it's a separatist. So you can actually play this on turn 2 in a Dooku deck. You'd have to play yellow. I'm not sure how much you want to play yellow in a Dooku deck, but that's definitely something worth exploring. The card's decent. I don't think it's like super exciting for all the leader, right? Like with a Dooku, you're getting a nice big beefy unit, but you're probably never getting the bounce effect, or at least not anytime soon when you do this in a Dooku deck. The Trench stuff, I mean, you heard what I thought about Trench. I just don't think it's going to be quick enough to hold off a lot of aggro stuff. And this still primarily is just like a chunky unit that doesn't do a ton. Like a lot of the time, even if you do get this bounce effect off, you might not be able to bounce the unit you want. So you're playing a 5-cost effect, but your opponent is also maybe playing a 5-drop that turn, and you're not interacting with the 5-drop. You can only interact with their small units. It will be nice if like a lot of pilot strategies develop that aim to like pilot cheap units, because that's where like the bounce can be really devastating. But yeah, it's definitely worth trying out in like a Dooku shell, a Wat Tambor shell, any leader that you can kind of deploy after you play this, right? And see kind of what happens. It is also a capital ship, so for Piet, I guess it would also cost 1 less. Not 2 less, though. Unless he's deployed. All right, next legendary, the Ghost. So we have another Ghost. This is a 5-cost Heroism, Vigilance Space Unit. It's a Rebel Vehicle Transport Spectre. It's a 5/6. It says each other friendly Spectre unit gains this unit's keywords. And then it says while this unit is upgraded, it gains Sentinel. So the idea here is you put like a pilot on it, right? This automatically gains Sentinel. It also gains whatever keywords the pilot would be giving it. And then all your other Spectres get this too. This is for a theme deck, a Spectre theme deck. I don't think this card is any good. I think it's just very slow. It's just, again, it's a 5-cost chunky unit that doesn't do anything when you play it. Requires you to have a big board. Like, it requires you to have things to then put on this for more resources. It requires you to then potentially have other Spectres that you're like trying to buff. The one interesting thing I like about this is like you can play the new R2 pilot for free, so you can make a giant space sentinel kind of the same turn that you play this. But yeah, overall, this is like, I think mostly for fun build around and not so much for a competitive build around. And the last new legendary is Nebula Ignition. This is a 9-cost vigilance event. It's a disaster. It says defeat each unit that isn't upgraded. So costs 1 more than Super Laser Blast. Notably, it's something Heroism can play though, which Super Laser Blast would cost 10 in Heroism. Defeat each unit isn't upgraded. So I guess maybe the idea here is you're playing units yourself that you are upgrading, and then this kills more of your opponent's things. But if your opponent has upgraded units and you're paying 9 to board wipe, and you can't even board wipe because they haven't upgraded or anything with a shield or an experience token or whatever, I don't think this card's any good. It's like incredibly expensive, and it doesn't even kill the whole board. I like my board wipes to kill everything. Otherwise, they're not really board wipes anymore. All right, here's a cool card. It's a rare. It's eject. It costs 2. It's command. It says detach a pilot upgrade, move it to the ground arena as a unit, and exhaust it. Draw a card. So bam, you're all of these pilot upgrades that you're playing, or pilot leaders. If you want, you can just jump ship for 2 cost. It doesn't actually cost you a card. It just costs you resources because you do get to draw the card back. Unfortunately, the units do come into play exhausted, so you can't do this thing where you like attack with the ship that's piloted and then detach and go to the ground and then bam, get to attack again. Now, in terms of like what you can do with this in a fair way, I don't think it's great in like most situations. Like very rarely would I want to like detach a unit just to put it on the ground. You can even look at like the big units like Chewbacca, right? It's a 5-cost 5/6 and it's 3 to upgrade. You're not really even getting a resource cheat in that sense because it's 3 for the Chewbacca upgrade and 2 for eject, which does cost 5 altogether. And then Chewbacca's just on the ground as a 5-cost unit. But there is some like cool maneuvering that you can do with that. Leaders as well, especially the ones that have like when played, you can like attach them, get their when played, they can get their attack off, and then you can eject to make sure that you're like diversifying threats. That's interesting. But the kicker here is Poe specifically, because Poe can attach to a unit as early as turn 1. If it's like a 1-drop, he can immediately upgrade. And then you can eject him on turn 2, and he's just a 4/6 on the ground, right? That's like the one place that I think this is kind of like cheating in some way. The fact that Poe is such a big-bodied unit. And note that this doesn't actually use the epic action for Poe. So if Poe gets defeated on the ground, it doesn't mean he can't deploy again. You still get to like deploy him after you do this. So that is interesting to me. I don't think it's like necessarily completely broken, but I like it. It reminds me a little bit of Now There Are Two of Them, like this kind of 2-card combo, except here it's not really a 2-card combo because Poe is just always in existence, right? All you need is a space unit. But it like gives you like a big chunky unit on the ground early. And like that's in that way, I think it's a little similar to that. But this is very reliable. You can do this most of the time and get a 4/6 on turn 2 if you need it to, right? That is strong. I don't think it's necessarily broken strong, but it is powerful. And I like the idea of just like having this as an option when playing with Poe. It doesn't even cost you a card. Remember, you draw a card, so it's not an all-in kind of strategy. It's just a lot of utility when you play it with the Poe leader. And then next, we've got No Glory, Only Results. This is a 5-cost Vigilance Villainy event. It's a tactic. It says take control of a non-leader unit, then defeat it. This is really cool. This is, okay, 5 to defeat a unit essentially is Vanquish, right? But this is a lot better than Vanquish in almost all situations. Because, first of all those like weird pesky units that you can't target with Vanquish, think Lurking TIE Phantom. Think anything with like the new Chewbacca. Since you get the control of them first and then defeat it, it will work because those things can't be defeated by enemy abilities, but they can be defeated by friendly abilities, and this would become a friendly ability in that sense. Second, when defeated effects. So, the absolute worst card for a villainy blue deck in the game, in my opinion, is Ruthless Raider. And all of a sudden, we now have a clean answer to Ruthless Raider that gives you the value, right? You get to take the Raider and then get the 2 damage to base and 2 damage to a unit, because all those when defeated effects will trigger on your side. It works against like K2 as well. There's a lot of interesting things like that. All in all, I just think it's a pretty strict upgrade to Vanquish. And if you play this in something like a Thrawn deck and your opponent is playing when defeated effects, wow, this goes even like further through the moon, because you're getting double triggers. Like, think you take the Ruthless Raider as Thrawn and you get to double trigger it and kill it. Same with like the K2, you can discard 2 cards from your opponent's hand or deal 6 through their base. This card is going to be, in my opinion, an important removal option. Right? It's not like super efficient. Vanquish was never an efficient card, but the ability now to get more like in a lot of situations, the fact that this answers the most troublesome card for a villainy blue deck, which is Raider, the fact that this can get around cards that can't be defeated, like Lurking TIE, Chewbacca stuff, I think this will play a pretty important role. All right, I'm going to jump over to SWDB to cover the rest of the cards. There's still a lot of good ones, so these were just a few that I wanted to call out before we went over there. All right, so I'm over on SWDB now, and I'm going to go through the rest of these cards. The first one is Stay on Target. This is an aggression event, cost 2. It says attack with a vehicle unit. For this attack, it gets +2/+0 and gains when this unit deals damage to a base, draw a card. I like this. This is a pretty solid pump. It's like in the vein of Breaking In and Surprise Strike. Of course, Surprise Strike kind of still remains king with the +3, but +2 and getting a card back is pretty solid. Of course, the restriction here, only a vehicle, but this could slot in potentially already into something like a Django deck that plays primarily vehicles. We might be looking at some more space focused red aggression decks. So just having an access to a pump, able to push more damage into base, and then the card replaces itself, keeps you going, helps you draw into more burn, more ways to finish the game off. I think the card is quite solid. Might be one of the better red pumping effects we've seen so far. Then we've got Guerrilla Soldier. This is a 3-cost cunning unit. It's a 2/3 Fringe Twi'lek Trooper. It says when played, deal 3 indirect damage to a player. If a base is damaged this way, ready this unit. So 3-cost 2/3, that's awful in terms of stats. The 3 indirect, it could be decent. You're playing with Boba, maybe you get the 4 indirect. Overall, I don't think the card's very good, but there is like some critical massive indirect damage that could end up being powerful enough if your opponent no longer has the option to soak damage into their units, and then like they have to take some damage from this effect, and then this gets to be readied. They get to take another 2 damage from this. You can actually target yourself as well if you wanted to, and then put some of the damage into your own base and then ready this card. Of course, then you're paying 3 costs to like play a readied 2/3. Not super exciting. Overall, not on the top of my list. We've got Sabine's Masterpiece. It's a pretty cool new space unit. It's a 3-cost Heroism. It's a 3/3 Rebel Vehicle Fighter Spectre. So a lot of relevant traits here, especially with the Rebel, the Spectre. I mean, it doesn't matter much for Hera because the card's already colorless. But it has a cool wave of on-attack effects here. It says if you control a blue unit, you heal 2 from a base. If you control a green unit, you give an experience token to a unit. If you control a red unit, deal 1 damage to a unit or base, and if you control a yellow unit, exhaust or ready a resource. It is colorless, so it does require you having some other unit, but if you do have another unit, a lot of these effects are pretty powerful. The cost here, of course, is that you're paying a 3/3 for 3 when the new baseline stats for space units is 3/4, and this does not brawl competitively with 3/4s at all. If you can give this ambush and you have some effects triggering, especially the experience one, I think that could be pretty powerful, because you can give the experience to itself. I think the yellow effect can be really, really powerful. Exhausting an opponent's resource early in the game could really mess them up. Overall, I like these effects. I'm gonna try this card out. I'm just worried that, stats still are king, and this does not have good stats when paired against most other space units, right? It trades off into 2 costs and loses out to most 3-cost units. We did a bunch of these. So here's Black 1. This is a 2-cost aggression heroism space unit. It's a 2/3 resistance vehicle fighter. It says while this unit is upgraded, it gets +1/+0. And then on attack, if you control Poe Dameron as a unit upgrade or leader, you may deal 1 damage to a unit. This is an auto include in a Poe deck. I don't think it's necessarily great outside of that. You do get this nice little buff that if you pilot it or something, it gets an extra +1 power, but it is just a 2/3 for 2 at its baseline. It does not have the rebel trait, unfortunately. It's just the resistance trait, which has way less payoffs from the rebel trait. Of course, you will slam this in a Poe deck because being able to also shoot things for 1 when you attack is really powerful, and Poe is also just an upgrade that you can immediately put on this, giving it the extra +1, right? So you would give it +2, +3, +1 with Poe, which is pretty powerful. But yeah, Poe auto include most likely. Outside of that, probably not. All right, here we've got Hera Syndulla. It's a 2-cost heroism vigilance pilot unit. It's a 2/3 restore 1. So, that's not great, but it's not awful, right? Like as a backup plan, just having a 2/3 restore 1 that you can play for 2. It is a Rebel Twilight Spectre pilot, and it has piloting for 2 that gives +2/+3 and restore 1. And the piloting I really like. +2/+3, we do see that stat line for a 2-cost pilot on a few things, but it is a very powerful upgrade stat line. And restore 1 is nice as well. It feeds into blue heroes kind of ability to race other decks because a lot of its units restore. It does that really well on the ground with things like Yoda and Kanan, and now it has the ability, in addition to like Restored Arc, to have more beef up there in space that will also help with this restore stuff. This looks like a pretty solid pilot. I think blue heroism actually got quite a few. We had Paige and Cassian, so they do have access to some decently statted pilot upgrades, and yeah, I think this is just like a pretty solid standalone card. Here we've got Phantom 2. It's a 3-cost heroism vigilance space unit. It's a 3/3 rebel vehicle transport spectre. It has grit. It says action costs 1. If this card is a unit, attach it to an upgrade as an upgrade to the Ghost, which we saw I reviewed a little while ago, and then the attached unit gets +3/+3 and gains grit. So that's a card call out. That's a very expensive combo to like play the Ghost, play this, attach it, right? I don't think any of that is particularly good. Again, it just looks more theme based than power level based. Although I will say that in a Han 2 deck, the red Han, you can play this on turn 1. It's a 5/1 in space, which is a lot of stats. Of course, I don't love 1 health in this world right now. We've seen how many ping effects exist in the current meta, so that part is maybe a little scary, but it is, at least in that sense, pretty interesting that you can make an absolute massive 5-power unit on turn 1 in that Han deck. Outside of that, I don't think this is doing much. I don't think this upgrade ghosty thing is going to be something we're working to achieve. Here's TIE Ambush Squadron. It's a 4-cost command villainy space unit. It's a 2/3 Imperial vehicle fighter with ambush. It says when played and when defeated, create a TIE fighter token. I like the when played. I like the when defeated. I'm not paying 4 for a 2/3 ambush. I don't think that's going to be relevant. It doesn't kill anything. It's so expensive for that miserable of a stat line, unfortunately. It does create 2 units the moment you play it. It does leave behind something. So if we're talking about doing things with exploit, I like that it triggers Darth Vader kind of immediately, right? You can always make a token after you ambush with this. It's just, what are we ambushing with this? And this is just going to die into basically almost everything it would ambush into. So sure, you get like your token. So you ambush, best case, maybe you trade with something and create 2 1/1s for 4 cost. Is that even any good? Probably not. The card's pretty cool. I just wish it had more stats. I like really wish it had more stats. One interesting thing I will say is with Victor Leader. If you played Victor Leader first, this then would ambush as a 3/4, and all of a sudden maybe it's doing something. But having to rely on Victor Leader to be alive is a tall order. All right, here we've got Phoenix Squadron A-Wing. It's a 2 cost command heroism space unit. It's a 3/2 rebel vehicle fighter, has no text. So, you know, they got Battlefield Marine and now they got this thing. It's good. It's, you know, 3 power in space. This is like Kylo's tie. I think there's a good chance some heroism decks will just be playing this instead of some other space units that they've been playing. I don't think it's better than like A-Wing because 2 health is still a liability against a lot of strategies, right? This dies into Daring Raid. It gets traded off with things like Inferno 4, which is not a unit you want your turn 1 play getting traded into from villainy decks. But having the ability to just have more 3 power turn 1 plays in this hero aggro stuff is good. It has Rebel, which is important. If it didn't, it probably wouldn't be any good. But because of that, you know, vanilla card that is solid. Here is Sith Trooper. It's a 3 cost villainy unit. It's a 3/3 first order Sith Trooper. So Sith, interesting. Anyway, has on attack, this unit gets +1/+0 for this attack for each damage unit the defending player controls. No, I don't think this is any good. I like the first order thing, I guess, like because Phasma can be putting damage into units, you might be able to like get a trigger here, but you're paying 3 for a 3/3. You don't want to pay 3 for a 3/3. Here's TIE Dagger Vanguard. It's a 3 cost villainy space unit. It's a 2/2 first order Sith vehicle fighter. It says when played, you may deal 2 damage to a damage unit. Maybe like to finish things off, but like again, the stats are miserable. 3 cost for a 2/2. Never happy about that. If you do kill something with this, then it's a little interesting. At least you leave behind a body, however mediocre that body is. We'll have to see just how much like lingering damaged units exist in a meta. It doesn't typically happen very much these days, but there are some leaders that might enable it, like Phasma specifically. And yeah, like I think mostly this is a draft card. All right, now we have Resistance X-Wing. It's a 2 cost heroism space unit. It's a 2/2 resistance vehicle fighter. While this unit has a pilot on it, it gets +1/+1. I'd rather just pilot good units as opposed to playing bad units just so that I have to pilot them for them to be relevant, right? Like we have enough 2 cost good space units at this point. You don't need to play a 2 cost 2/2 that is only ever good if you then follow up with a pilot. You just want your cards to be good without that. All right. Swarming Vulture Droid. It's a neutral card. It's a 2 cost space unit. It's a 2/2 separatist droid vehicle fighter. It says a deck can have 15 copies of this card. And it says this unit gets +1/+0 for each other friendly Swarming Vulture Droid. I mean, I don't recommend you play 15 2/2s in your deck. Yeah, that's about it. The ghost we did actually. Yeah, the last one is actually really interesting. This is Chamsindula. It's a 4 cost aggression unit. It's a 5/4 rebel Twi'lek. So beefy stats. 4 health on the 4 drop has been not fantastic, but you know, 5/4 for 4 is still beefy. And has a very interesting when played effect. So it says when played, if an opponent controls more resources than you, you may put the top card of your deck into play as a resource. If your opponent ramps, you get to ramp with this. So When is this likely to happen on the 4 resource turn is if your opponent plays something like Super Laser Tech or Resupply, and then your 4 resource turn is their 5 resource turn. That's like the cleanest time that this will ever trigger. I think it can trigger quite often against the Han Solo deck as well. They use the Han ability, they resource, you play this, although they're not often using the Han ability on their own 4 resource turn to go to 5, although it does happen sometimes. This is decent. I mean, it also lets you later in the game just stop resourcing early, and then you can play this as a beefy unit and then ramp. In a deck maybe with Lando, the Lando leader, you're blowing up your own resources. You can basically guarantee this ramps you back up. I think the issue here, of course, is just the 4 health on your 4 drop. The not so much board affecting ability from it, right? It's ramping. So you think maybe like in an aggro deck where you are able to kind of not be reacting to your opponent, where you're presenting threats that your opponent has to react to you, right? Because this in anything like mid-range and control is not going to do much the turn you play it. It's going to make you fall behind even more, and it's a unit that's very susceptible to getting traded down. So the card is very interesting. Having aggression be able to ramp now, it could be very much a sideboard strategy into green ramp decks. If you're able to sequence this against a Han, that again can be quite powerful. And it's cool that this exists. I think it has definitely some room to be playable. And yeah, that's it for now. We got, I believe, one more major week of spoiler season. We'll get the last 2 leaders, and then we'll see kind of what happens after that. If we get like a big burst of the rest of the spoilers, or if they're kind of trickle out with media kits and stuff like that. But yeah, let me know what you think of the cards, and until next time, take care.